Welcome to the Whole Enchilada, a community of high achievers that fight the status quo, rebel against mediocrity, and make life happen. Let's go. Hey, Enchilada Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Whole Enchilada. Really excited about the conversation today with my good friend, Ben Chipman. Ben and I, you may have saw on our social media platform that I successfully completed a 50K to the highest peak in Utah, Kings Peak, and I would not have done it if I didn't get the call from Ben inviting me to go with him. And I will tell you that he was much more prepared for this 50K than I was. So I wasn't going to let him finish without me. So I had to finish it too, but we're going to chat through that today and learn a little bit more about Ben. But Ben, just a quick background of how Ben and I became friends is Ben actually married one of my favorite people on planet Earth, my niece, Sarah Black. Well, I guess it's Sarah Chipman now. But we became, and honestly, Ben, I think you already know this, is at the time you guys got married, in my mind, nobody was good enough for Sarah, right? So I had a little bit of a guard up saying like, I don't care how good of a guy you are. Nobody's good enough for Sarah, but you've broken down that barrier and wall, I think, for me and a lot of people in our family of just being a great guy. And we're proud to be related to you, and not only related to you, but it's been fun to build a friendship with you over the last couple of years as well. So Ben is a BYU grad and currently works at the Lending Club, which is a lending and tech company here locally in Utah, and he is the operations oversight analyst there. Ben, what else should we know about you before we get into this conversation?
I should probably agree with you. I am way too lucky that I got to marry Sarah. A little bit about me. I studied chemistry actually at BYU. Went into fintech when I decided I didn't want to do a PhD and keep going in chemistry. Still love the sciences, miss it a lot. Yeah, I love running. I do a lot more rock climbing though and skiing. Kind of those are my passions, main passions. And yeah, I think that's kind of about it. Oh yeah, I should mention we're expecting our first in 7 weeks. We're gonna have so
you love adventure. You're about to go on the biggest adventure of your lifetime, fatherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very excited.
That's exciting. Being a dad is one of the coolest things ever, but also one of the scariest things ever. As a lot of you know, I shared some of my thoughts that I've learned in fatherhood a couple of weeks ago in my Father's Day episode. But it is such a huge honor to be a dad, and it's constantly scary. It doesn't get easier or less fearful over time. So yeah, gear up for it. You'll do great. All right, so let's talk about this. So a few weeks ago, you reached out to me and invited me to come on this, and I got to ask this question first. I'm not quite sure if the invite came out of charity, of like, let me invite the old man to come with me because I know he likes to do crazy things too, or if it was like I need somebody to do this with, and I know Marcus can pull it off. I want the real answer. Which one was it?
Well, we've talked several times about doing big runs together. You know, you've mentioned the Grand Canyon, going rim to rim to rim over 2 days, and I was like, that would be really fun. And I've always, this whole thing kind of came up very spontaneously for myself. And you and I were together kind of the weekend after it kind of popped into my mind. So I was like, I should mention this to Marcus. I'm sure if he was interested in the Grand Canyon, that he'd be interested in Kings Peak. Yeah. And sure enough, you were. So, and I'm very grateful you came, because it's nice to have somebody else and not be completely alone with my thoughts for the 10 hours.
Yeah, it was a good time. So you picked, how long ago did you identify this race or this distance or this path as something you wanted to do? How long before we did it was that?
Well, I guess I set this goal like early May, so exactly 2 months before we actually did it. I'd been contemplating doing kind of one of the ultra marathon distances, or just a bigger distance, since about 3 years ago when I first started getting into trail running. So
Well, one of the things I like about you, and you mentioned this in your intro too, is that your real passions from an adventure standpoint are rock climbing and skiing. And I love people that cross train, that have multiple pieces, right? Because the same thing for me is like, I'm not out running all the time. That's not my main passion of I love trail running, but particularly not distance training. But my passion is all around MMA and that kind of stuff right now. So but I love being rounded out from that standpoint of not just being so focused on that one discipline that you neglect other parts of your fitness. So did you have to pull off some of your other training, like some of your rock climbing, and obviously ski season's wrapped up, but did you have to rob a little bit from some of those other passions to give some energy to this, or were you able to balance it and still keep those other passions flaming?
No, yeah, it has taken some time away from other things. Coming off of this last ski season, my legs were pretty stronger than other ski seasons. And I was like, I should get right into trail running this summer. I'm not a huge runner, but trail running I find to be very enjoyable because you get deep into the mountains and it's not on a road, and it's, intriguing to look at what you're looking at. And it's a fun challenge. And so I thought, I should get right into trail running. I shouldn't take a break. And so skiing rolled right into that. But, I was kind of injured. I had a wrist injury at the beginning of the spring. And so I was taking some time off rock climbing in general. And then near the end of my training for this run, I started getting back into it. But I had to take a little bit more time off at the end of it to finish up, my training, just because when you're running 20, 26 miles, it just takes a lot of time. And so it did push a little bit back on my rock climbing, which was a bummer. I'm very excited to get back to it. Yeah. But in general, it wasn't too much of a toll on it.
Yeah. And I think there's a good life lesson around that, because there's, you're obviously, this kind of stuff was we're self-inflicting this pain, right? We're choosing, nobody held a gun to our head, or our livelihoods weren't at stake by telling us to go do this thing. So this is self-inflicted pain, which is I'm very big on purposeful adversity, right? Building up that grit. But I also like doing it outside your normal thing. And I think it's healthy to say, I'm going to do something outside of my normal structure that's going to push me. It's going to challenge me in a different way. And I also think a healthy part of that is not only taking on the new challenge, but actually making a sacrifice somewhere else that's comfortable for you, right? So like the time on the mat in the MMA gym is comfortable for me because I do it regularly. The time on the rock or in the rock climbing gym is comfortable for you. And to make a sacrifice of something you love and that is comfortable for you is just as important as applying that energy into something new and rounding, making a more round, complete self, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I kind of think of that from a business standpoint too. I mean, I know you're earlier on in launching your career, and I know you've got a super bright career ahead of you. It's been fun to kind of see your vision of what you want to do and where you want to grow. And thinking back on my own career journey, it's that like anytime I've taken on a new venture, a new opportunity, for me to say yes to that, I've had to rob or steal from something else, right? Something else I've got going on in my world, and sometimes that's other business areas, and sometimes it's personal things, like even real important relationship pieces to me. So I think and I'm just kind of talking out loud here as I'm learning from myself too, is that idea of when you rob from something that you find passion in, or that you find joy in, it makes sense to push something forward, but then we got to make sure to give that time back to that passion piece, right?
Yeah, right. I feel like I'm actually relearning that every single week. I'm always like, oh, next week I'll slow down. I'll be able to like get to all the things that I want to be able to do. And then something pops up. I mean, right now my wife and I are looking at purchasing a home, and I mean, just the initiating that process has taken up so much time. I'm like, holy cow, this is, life is tough to balance. So
it is
relearning
tough to balance.
it every week.
So. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. I mean, I remember, in the last couple of years, you've made the transition from student to full-time businessman. I remember thinking as I was wrapping up school, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have so much time. I'm gonna have so much time back because I won't be studying for finals, and I won't be going to these things. And then somehow after you graduate, you're like, where is all that free time I thought I was going to have? And it's, same thing. My wife teases me because I'm like, oh, as soon as I get this business launched and rolling, I'm going to have so much free time. But our time tends to be filled up with stuff regardless. Are you experiencing that already?
Yeah, I graduated kind of a year after the initial impact of COVID. And it did seem like there was a flood of time. Well, with COVID and moving school to being online and that initial impact, I got a ton of time during that and during the summer subsequent, and then during kind of after graduation. But now, as the world seems to be rolling back into normal or new normal or whatever you call it, I feel like, time is going away. And I mean, we're starting a family, and it's quickly being depleted. So.
Yeah, I think the lesson there is that for us to learn not to always be thinking, oh, it's going to get better when. It's how do I make it better now? Like how do I maximize my enjoyment and productivity in this moment instead of wishing and hoping for when it gets better. So let's jump into the day of the event. We drove up late Friday night, just rolled out a couple sleeping bags in the back of my pickup. And I want to talk about this piece of it for a minute, because right before we hit the sack and went to bed, our game plan originally was to get up and start running really early, but our plans changed. So walk us through a little bit about kind of our conversation and our thought process, and why we changed the game plan at the last minute.
Right. Yeah. I was prepared for it to be really hot because it was end of June and almost middle of the summer, and we looked at the weather and it did not look like it was going to be so hot. And in fact, it was going to be extremely cold if we got up. I think I originally was planning like 3 a.m, just because that's when I had kind of started other big runs or other big hikes or backpacking things if I wanted to stay cool and work off the temperature of the environment. But it was going to be freezing, and it was freezing as we were going to bed. So we just started talking. We're like, what would be the best time to start? The other kind of pro to starting early in the morning was hopefully you're 10 or 12 miles in by the time the sun starts to come up. And having run in the dark and seeing the sun come up, it's a big motivator. It really like lifts your spirits. And I just thought, that'll be nice to be a third of the way done, have the sun come up, and just feel like, all right, we're gunning for it still. I feel like I'm just starting and I'm 10 miles in. Instead, though, because it was so cold, we decided to push it off to like 6:30, and start when the sun was already up and when it seemed a reasonable temperature, so that we wouldn't have to worry about packing so many layers and having so much weight on our backs and managing, putting on or taking off those layers as we were going. And I think it was the right decision. I think what we did worked really well. So.
Yeah, I'm really glad we called that audible and made that shift for all those reasons you talked about. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is and a lot of our listeners may be thinking like, well, why is this part of the conversation? But one thing I've learned over time is, and I really appreciated this about you coming into this, is you had a game plan, right? You knew what time you wanted to start. You knew about where you were going to be on the trail when the sun was going to come up. You knew in that moment you were going to need that extra push right before we hit a big spike in elevation. Like you had a game plan put together, which I really appreciated. And one of the things that I've learned over time is how important it is to have a solid plan in place for whatever you're doing, and also not being so married to that plan that you can't call an audible, you can't shift it. Because no matter how much time and effort you put into planning, there will be variables that show up in the moment of application of the plan that were unpredictable. And sometimes when I have that conversation with people, they make the thing of like, well, why put the time and effort into putting together a plan if you're going to be okay shifting the plan? And the difference, in my opinion, is when you have the plan and you're calling an audible, you're tweaking a plan. If you go into something with no plan, it takes a lot more energy to create a plan, which is different than tweaking a plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I was just going to say the variable that we experienced was the change in temperature. I don't know if you looked at the weather, but I was looking at weather at different elevation profiles, of the mountain for a couple weeks beforehand. And the day after it was supposed to be much warmer. And the reason it was so cold the day that we ran it is because we had a huge storm sweep through the Uinta Range. And I think it seemed to me like all that rain and all that cloud cover caused the temperature to drop so low, which, I did not anticipate. I just thought, oh, the weather will be the weather, it'll be warm. And so, I had planned for the weather, but the very, consistent calm weather, but that variable of weather changing caused us to need to pivot. And yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking to change the plan. I'll say that, because there was all this effort that we had put forth to be prepared and to go on this run. And so to change it, it's like, well, I hope it works. I prepared to do it this way. I hope that doing it that way works now. And but it did. So
yeah, I really do think it paid off. So let's talk about the run for a minute. So for you, tell me a couple of the highlight moments, like those moments of impact, either something that came to mind or like your favorite part of it. Give me some of your highlights.
Excuse me. I was thinking about this because you mentioned to think about it when you talked about doing a podcast. And the run, I mean, I can think of different parts during the run, but the whole thing was just kind of enjoyable. I guess I thought of it as in three parts. The first part was, the 10 hours preceding the run. We were driving up to the Uintas and we were driving south, and the sun was coming in from the west and the clouds are leaving in the east, and it just looked epic. And all of a sudden it just kind of like hit me how epic it like felt in my own heart. And I kind of like shuddered, and I like looked at you and I was like, it's kind of crazy that this is here right now, that we've prepared for this. And it just feels, it's like the pre-race jitters. And I had to calm those down and try and sleep that night. And I had them the next morning. But, and that was kind of the first moment I thought of. But the second moment I thought of was, well, during the run, that immediately went away. And it was just pounding the trail all the way through. And we caught up to each other at certain parts, and we had good conversation as we were summiting, and it was very enjoyable. And, none of those emotions hit me during the run. The whole run was just another trail run.
Yeah.
On the way out, there was a minute where a minute, it happened like every half hour, where my quads cramped up really bad, and I had to try and raise my legs really high and stretch them out and such. But they didn't stop me from running. So that was probably the most poignant moment. But nothing really eventful happened during the run. It was just very enjoyable. And then getting done with the run, all leading up to this, I'd done several training runs where I had finished them and I was just dying. At the end of my 16-mile run, I was dying. At the end of my 22-mile run, I was just dying. And every time I was like, I don't know if I can run a 50K. Like, I don't think I can go any further. And if I can't go further now, how am I going to go further next time? And so going into this, I was heavily questioning my ability to be able to accomplish it. And not just to accomplish it, but accomplish it in good fashion. So running everything that is reasonable to run, everything that's not crazy steep, or that the terrain you can actually place your feet on, that's not too rocky, or not at 13,000 feet and hard to breathe at. And so to finally finish it and realize, hey, I can do it. I did it. I just proved it to myself. I mean, I had a moment where I just kind of shouted out a few times, like, yes. Yeah. And I leaned against the tailgate of your truck, and I kind of broke down in tears for a second, because I was like, holy cow, I did not realize how much emotion and how much effort I had behind this. And it was just so interesting to see the contrast of before the run, I had all these jitters. During the run, it was just another run. It just felt really good. And then after the run, just this climax of emotion hit me. So yeah.
I love how you broke it down into those three sections. Because all of us experience, no matter how much you're prepared or unprepared, you're going to feel those pre-race jitters, right? And we're use the term pre-race jitters, but this is for anything like business, going for a promotion, anything that is. There's this pre-race or pre-event nervousness that comes around that our brains create for us. And I think for the most people that becomes crippling, right? That they decide to take no action because of the fear of the unknown of the result. What was interesting though is how you described the actual run, going through the process of it. is it just was another trail run, which to me shows the preparation showed up. Once you made the decision of like, hey, I'm pushing my jitters aside, I'm pushing the fear aside, I'm just going to go do what I know how to do, and I'm prepared to do. I'm just going to execute. It felt normal and comfortable for you. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I really love, that I want to go a little bit deeper on too, is that the limiting belief you had before of like, is this possible for me? Like I've seen other people do it. I've aspired to do it, but is it possible for me? And then obviously you felt that emotion at the end of it of like, I was able to accomplish this. Like, how do you take that moving forward, like of identifying the next challenge in your life? Like, is there an underlying lesson that you'll think you'll carry forward out of that?
Right. That's a good question. I'm having scattered thoughts on it. Well, I think that preparation always builds a lot more confidence. One of the things that you and I were talking about is on the drive in, we're looking at the mountain range, and I was like, I'm going to do it. There's no way I'm not going to do this. Like, I have this hesitant moment where I think, oh, do I really want to do this run? It's so long. It's so hard. I'm going to dig myself deep into the mountains. What if something happens? And then the next second I was like, well, of course I'm going to do it. It's hard. I want to know if I can do it.
Yeah.
But the other thought I had was I calculated all the miles of training I had done. And it was something like 200 miles of running over the last 2 months. I was like, I didn't run 200 miles to not go run the next 30, 31. And I think just preparation can build a lot of confidence and can build a lot of security. I wasn't sure if I could do it, but I had put a whole bunch of effort into being prepared to be able to do it. And, whether I believed or didn't believe I could do it, I could believe in the process. And that, hey, I ran 22 miles 2 weeks ago. I ran a marathon last week. On all those runs, I gained the amount of elevation that is, parallel to what we're about to do right here. So I've prepared for this. I've put in the work. And I think that you can apply that to lots of things in life where if you're unsure if you can accomplish it, prepare and then rely on that preparation, have confidence in what you've done. So.
I love that. It's really interesting to hear you talk through this, because the result was the same, right? You and I both started. Our pacing was a little bit different. We crossed paths several times depending on where we were filtering water, things like that. We summited together. And then we both finished, right? You finished before me, but at the end, we both finished and accomplished the goal of getting there. But it's interesting to hear you talk about, I had done all this preparation, physically and mentally. I needed to prove to myself I could do it. And I was almost the exact opposite, in the fact that physically I had not prepared at all for this, right? I'm obviously working out on a regular basis, but not doing distance running. Like you talked about several hundred miles with it, of running within the months leading up. I maybe had run 50 miles in the total in the couple months leading up, right? Yeah. But I think the difference is you were way more physically prepared for it, but mentally I've put myself through so many mentally challenging things that in my mind I was just like, if I have to crawl out and I'm gonna make it. Like I've been through way worse stuff than this, regardless of what's gonna happen to me. Like I'm gonna finish it. Right. So I think it was just interesting, and really probably what that comes down to is just more experience, right? I've got almost 20 years on you, and just more hard things over time. That mental game for me is just like, well, I can make it. Now, the perfect combination would have been if I had that mental resilience and had been more physically prepared for it. Right. But it's just interesting as you were talking about it to see, like, you were relying on your physical preparation to prove it to your mind. I was relying on my mental preparation to prove it to my body.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I thought when I got done was, I'm not completely wasted. Like, I could run another mile if I needed to. I could probably run another 3. Like, I felt really good. And yeah, it was interesting to realize, wow, my physical preparation has taken me farther than I even planned on going. Yeah. So
Yeah, and then it's interesting where if a month ago the idea of even 100K would be like, oh my gosh, but because you've never hurdled the 50K benchmark, right? But once you finish that, it's like, well, is 100K possible? Is a 50 miler possible? Like all of a sudden it's like, okay, well,
is that so unreasonable?
Is that so unreasonable? Where a month ago it might have felt unreasonable or untouchable, right?
Yeah, and I talk to people at work or friends, and they're like, "I can't believe you did that." And I was like, I couldn't either 2 months ago, but now I've done it. Or 3 years ago when I started trail running, I was in the exact same spot as you. But I think we're all capable of doing something like this, including everybody who's like, "I can't believe." It's interesting because I totally understand where they're coming from with those comments, and I've traveled the journey from there to where I am now. So.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's really applicable in life and in business, because I think a lot of people set really big goals for themselves, right? I'd love to someday do this, whether it's a 50K or a marathon, or even from a business perspective, I'd love to make this amount of money. Like I see other people do it, I'd love to do that. And then in their mind, it's untouchable, it's undoable. And I think the thing that I would encourage people to do is they say, like, don't discount that goal just because in your mind in that moment is telling you it's untouchable or undoable. It's pick that next stepping stone that would be the pathway to the goal, right? So if the goal for someone, say the goal for someone was to do a 50K at some point, but that seems untouchable, well, go run a 5K, right? That you have to accomplish a 5K before you'll ever be ready for a 50K. So don't discount the goal, but pick the next stepping stone and say, well, once I finish that, well, now can I do a 10K? Or if in a business world, if the goal is to make $500,000 and that feels untouchable to you, well, go do the activities to make your first 100K, right? Or whatever that looks like. But I think that once you accomplish that next stepping stone, all of a sudden things start becoming more clear to you of like, well, if I can do that, what else can I accomplish?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm trying to figure out where my career is going, and I've seen different places or different people at different places in their careers, and I'm like, wow, how did they get to that point, or how could I get to that point? And sometimes it feels so imposing, but it's this is a really good comparison for me. I think, well, it's totally doable. I just need to take the next step.
Yeah. So. And all those people that you probably look up to, that you're like, man, look where they're at, and what they've accomplished. A lot of times we think they just appeared there. But the truth of the matter is if you dug into it and looked backwards with them, they'd be able to identify the stepping stones they took to get there. Hey, look at that. I stood there, and then I stepped there, and then I did this, and then I did this. And there's this pattern. There's something I say all the time, that success is sequential. There's a sequence to success. And so anybody that you define or perceive as successful, there's clues behind them of what led to that success. So I think that's an interesting conversation. So one last thing I wanted to ask you about, one of the things you brought up on the I think I remember if it was on the drive or at one point we were running together. But something you've learned about yourself recently that I really appreciated, and I have as well, is you have this innate desire to learn, like passion of learning. Tell me a little bit about like how you came to that realization.
Yeah, it's so I'm in a leadership program at work, and we took a Strengths Finders survey by a company called Gallup. I suggest everybody do it if they get the chance. It's totally worth it. It has opened a lot of insights to how I function and what drives me. But one of my my number one strength was I'm a learner, and I love to learn. And if it sacrifices efficiency, but I get to learn more, I'd rather learn than be more efficient at some processes. Or it's kind of like the number one thing overall. There's good to it, and there's sometimes bad to that. But reflecting on that, I just thought of what has driven me in the past. I studied chemistry at BYU, and I'm not in chemistry now, and I loved to learn it. and it was really enjoyable. I would not, go back and study anything else. I'm working in fintech now, but I wouldn't have gone back and studied finance if it would help me. I loved chemistry too much to take it away. Now, I didn't want to do a PhD, and you could say, well, maybe you don't love learning so much, but I didn't want to do the PhD because of the tedious research process where maybe you never actually get anywhere. You don't really learn much in the end because that's how research goes. But after I discovered learning, while I've been at my job, I've thought I've really missed science and I've really missed chemistry. But after I realized that I have this love for learning, I did notice, I've really enjoyed learning more about this bank and about this environment and how loans work and how all the departments work together, and who does what and how does this process hand off to this other group, and what's dependent on what and what laws and regulations do we need to follow. There's just so much behind it, and I've loved to learn more and dive deeper into all of these things. And so it's just kind of driven just an interest and a desire for me to do better at my job and kind of excel and become more in it. But
yeah, I love that. And I love the connection you made with what you said a minute ago of like, well, someone could question my love for learning if I decide not to go get a PhD or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And I get that question too. Sometimes people ask me, like, wow, why haven't you gotten an MBA or something like that? Which in my perspective, I feel like I've gotten an MBA through just learning on my own of what I wanted to learn. I don't have the certificate on my wall, but something that I learned a long time ago, or someone told me, was one of what we call the 6 personal perspective is learning for doing sake, not just learning for learning's sake. And even though like going through an MBA program, I would learn a lot of really incredible things, I'd also be forced to learn some things that maybe weren't applicable or important to me. Where my lifelong journey is, because I am a reader every day. I'm constantly learning, constantly striving to get to the next level, but I'm very selective and purposeful in what I'm learning so I can go do. It's what am I trying to do right now? What am I trying to accomplish right now? And what is the gap in my knowledge? Now my learning has taken on purpose, because I know where I'm trying to go and I know what the gap in my knowledge is. Now I'm learning to fill that gap, not just learning to learn. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That actually makes me wonder, we did a lot of lab work in my education. I wonder if I enjoyed learning more because we had to turn around and apply it in actual physical application of let's, make Tylenol, or let's derive caffeine from a plant, or, if I wasn't actually applying these things, would I have loved it so much? It's just an interesting thought.
Yeah.
And I love it now in my job because I have to apply, it's like, I got to do the work and I have to learn to do the work. And so it makes it fun for me. So,
yeah, well, good for you. Well, man, I've really appreciated the invite to go and drag me along on a 50K. Hopefully I held my own on it, but we had a great time. Loved the conversation, loved the energy. It was awesome to do with you.
Yeah, I think you totally held your own, and I'm very grateful that you came along, because it made it a much more enjoyable experience, I believe. And I've it's promoted a lot of conversation, helped me learn a lot about myself. So thank you.
Awesome. Any last thoughts you'd want to leave our listenership today?
No, I've got a lot of thoughts for myself. So
honestly, that's what I love about these conversations for me, is people ask me sometimes like, oh, why do you spend so much time doing these or other things? I'm like, man, you should see my journal. I'm constantly taking notes as I'm having these conversations, because I think I learn more than anybody on these conversations. So I really appreciate you coming, really admire who you are, and really excited to see a very, very bright future ahead of you, and particularly with a new baby on the way. So thanks for all you do, and thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right, Enchilada Nation, you heard it here. I've been on a kick lately talking about choosing to do hard things, creating purposeful adversity in your world. Hopefully you see I'm putting my money where my mouth is and doing hard things purposely with the intent of growing my grit. Because I know there's some very challenging and big shifts going on in the world right now from an economic standpoint, a business standpoint, and a lot of that reflects over into relationships and other things we have going on. So it is my belief that having an extra measure of grit, determination, and vision of where you're going is more important now than ever. And doing things like this help you do that. So Enchilada Nation, thank you again for plugging in. Thanks for your commitment to growing to the next level. And don't forget, go live life on your terms.